3, 2, 1. Welcome to the David the Dog Trainer Podcast, episode 187.
What's up?
What's good? All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about virtual lessons. I've done a couple of them this week already. Two, actually, I think I've done three. Two in particular I want to talk about today.
Okay.
So we've talked about them before. I love doing virtual classes. I think there's something to being forced as a trainer to just communicate in the most clear, efficient way possible to your client. Get them to understand how to fix the problems that they're having. Get them to understand their role in the problems that they're having. Get them to understand there are some really simple solutions for the things that you're doing in order to work through your problems, right? So I want to kind of talk about two of them that I did. I want to talk about my process for kind of intaking a client for virtual classes, and then we will break down both of these classes specifically using the documents that I have that I had the client send me. So you can kind of get a feel for how I conduct them, as well as you guys can learn some things as far as some mistakes these clients were making with some of the behavioral issues that they're having. So where do I want to start here? So how do I sign people up for virtual classes? Obviously, we offer virtual classes via Zoom, right? Very straightforward. A lot of clients do them. And usually how I vet the clients on if virtual classes are going to be a good fit for them is based on their goals. And it's a little bit contrary to popular belief how I do that. So I think a lot of people look at virtual classes and they think, all right, well, if I want to train my dog, I'm not having really big issues, stuff like that, you know, virtual class is going to be a great fit. But if I'm struggling with aggression issues, if I'm struggling with reactivity issues, if I'm struggling with behavioral modification issues as a whole, that they're not going to be a good fit, which I always say is the polar opposite, right? So I tell people what virtual classes are great for is troubleshooting behavioral issues, getting to the bottom of why your dog is rehearsing the things that they're doing, tweaking things that you may have already tried, particularly when we're dealing with people who have done an extensive training with their dog before, but haven't seen the results they're looking for. A lot of times that really is an issue of the implementation of the methods that they're doing and tweaking those things. What virtual classes are not great for is the mundane training of basic behaviors, right? We're talking, you know, a brand new green dog that we're just trying, they're not having big behavioral issues, but we want to teach them sit stays, down stays, bed stays, recalls, stuff like that. Those things are very challenging to teach via virtual classes because they're the mechanics that the owner needs to know to teach precise behaviors can be very challenging. I usually recommend there's 1,000,001 trainers out there that can teach your dog how to do a downstay. There are not many trainers out there that can teach your dog how to not be an absolute psychopath in the house from a massive behavioral issue standpoint. So that's the first way that I kind of vet the clients initially for it. From there, each client that signs up for the virtual classes, I tell them before the class to send me two things. I ask them to send me an email with some sort of documentation of their major goals that they have, what exactly the dog is doing that they want the dog to stop, things that they have tried so far in order to get the dog to stop doing these things, any history of training that they may have, and then obviously any type of videos they may be able to get of the dog rehearsing these behavioral issues in the first place, right? So the reason why I want to highlight these two particular one-on-ones is because these were probably the most in-depth answers to those questions that I've received prior to doing virtual classes, which helped us be able to isolate the problem behaviors and get to a really great place with those clients in a very short period of time.
Okay.
Right? So we'll talk about this one first. This dog's name is Tank. Tank. So Tank lives down in West Palm Beach, Florida. They found us through they have a pot cake mix, which obviously they rescued from Pot Cake Place Rescue in Turks and Caicos, who we have a very good relationship with, who sent a ton of dogs to us, and they referred them up to us. So we'll kind of talk about the issues. I'm going to read this form that they sent me, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of these individual things, and we are going to talk a little bit about how I dissect this kind of stuff and some of the things that I coach them through.
Sure. Isn't it crazy how small the world is?
Small world.
How pot cakes have just brought so many clients to you, you know?
Dude,
over the
like
years.
Especially that, like, it's different than, like, you know, our relationship with a specific local rescue or anything like that is, because, you know, Pot Cake Place Rescue, they're in Turks and Caicos, obviously. The population of people that live full-time in Turks and Caicos is pretty low, so the majority of people that are adopting these dogs live all around the freaking world.
Yeah.
So it's like when they're having issues with these dogs, since we are the people that have, up until this point, been the predominant force in helping them overcome the behavioral issues they've been experiencing with them. Like, we get connected with so many people that have driven their dogs in from out of state to work with us, or done virtual classes like this, or, you know, at some point this year, I'm actually supposed to go to Turks and Caicos and help work with the rescue a little bit, which would be fucking sweet.
Dude, that'd be crazy.
Let's go.
Dang.
But yeah, no, for sure. Super cool. So let's talk about Tank here. So I'm going to read the whole thing first, and then we'll break it down one at a time. Hi, David. Our top issues and concerns for addressing with Tank are as follows. Number 1, stranger aggression. This is the main concern that we feel needs to be addressed, that causes significant stress and is a safety risk. So we'll provide the most details here. It manifests both in and out of the home and is directed at people both inside and outside. Inside of the home. Out of control barking and jumping on the windows at deliveries, pool cleaner, landscapers, or even just people walking past our house on the street. If he sees someone outside of our home, he begins barking, his hackles go up, and he will start jumping all over the windows and doors. If someone enters our home, we absolutely must muzzle him and or keep him on a leash or in a separate room to keep him safe, or to keep them safe. This is regardless of whether he's met them multiple times. We have several friends and family members that he's acclimated to previously, but when they come, it's starting all over, even if they are staying in our house and go to their bedroom and come back to the living room, for example. There are only 2 people who could safely enter our home without these precautions. Our friends who have a puppy he loves and is known for over a year. They can come in, pet him, and he greets them as nicely as he does us. In the past, we have tried to correct the behavior through scolding or physically interfering with behavior, but when he is in that kind of frenzied state over threshold, he is also snapped at us. Outside of the home, we see this behavior on walks. We'll explain in the next section. But also, when we are driving in the car and stop at a light or drive past people in our neighborhood, he will again begin barking crazy, jumping at the car windows, and generally becoming frantic and agitated until the person is no longer visible. Going to the vet is also very stressful. He barks aggressively and lunges at the vet techs, office staff, etc. The only exception to this is when we take him to board at the facility where we took him to do e-collar training. He loves the trainers and staff there. They say that they never had trouble with him. Occasionally, when they hand him over to us to go home, he will turn back and start barking at them, but they are all confident and sort of laugh it off and ignore him, and he stops. Moving on. What we've tried so far, they have tried to muzzle and leash in the house for safety. The muzzle works well. He acts frozen at first, then his behavior is a lot more subdued. He still barks, growls, but no snapping. The leash works less well, and we only use that when he needs to have water or eat or something that makes the muzzle impractical. Thing number 2, keeping shades down to minimize triggers. This works fairly well, though sometimes he could still see shadows, and also it's very depressing for the home to constantly be dark.
Yeah. Especially in Florida.
Distracting and throwing treats on the ground when we know someone is approaching the house. Works for a brief period, but then he barks between bites of food. If we do this too late, he's already over threshold and uninterested in food. Giving him a Kong or other treats during car rides. This works reasonably well, but we obviously cannot always predict when something will come into view, and it's hard to have treats that last the entire trip. Plus, constantly monitoring him while driving. Crating works well. He is comfortable in his crate, and we put on white noise. Verbal scolding. This interrupts some behaviors, but it quickly resets. Training the place command. Not effective, but that's on us. He knows where to go when we give the command, but we didn't effectively train him to stay there. For the vet, we medicate in advance with both gabapentin and trazodone. To be honest, it does not seem like this does much to help. Though he will seem completely tired and calm at home, going to the office wakes him back up. We have a vet who is understanding of these issues, so we muzzle for visits, and they know how to handle him. When one of the techs takes his leash to him to take him into another room, he instantly resists but then goes along, and they tell us he does fine. Then they bring him back to us, hand me the leash, and he turns on them as if he's never seen them before, back to barking, lunging, etc. So it seems like our presence makes things worse. E-collar. I shared our experience with this when we spoke. He seemed to habituate to corrections, which we'll talk about in a minute here. So, goal number 2, walks. This is closely related to the first issue. Taking Tank on walks has become impossible. He is constantly on high alert, searching for threats, and reacts aggressively to anything he sees. People, dogs, or cars. He barks, his hackles go up, and he forcefully pulls on the leash to go after whatever the perceived threat is. This behavior is more severe at night, as you can see in the video. What we've tried. We worked on this extensively with the e-collar. As I mentioned, the issue we ran into was that the correction started to not work. And as we increased the strength of the correction, he would yelp and shriek, but still not stop the behavior. It became really painful, and he would get bad irritation around his neck. And frankly, we felt really bad about doing it and hearing him suffer. Positive reinforcement. Starting walks with focusing on watch me, rewarding for eye contact, etc., to try to get off to a positive start before we encounter any triggers. This does work somewhat well during the daytime when combined with the next bullet, avoiding. Unfortunately, at night, the perceived threats are far more compelling than even hot dogs or cheese. Avoidance. Doing a U-turn, changing direction, crossing the street whenever we see anything in the distance that he might think is a threat to give him space. Avoiding walks altogether. This is the current state. We take Tank for relief in the backyard and only go for a walk late at night before bed when there aren't many people around and the yard is too dark. Even then, he will encounter triggers from time to time, and then they put medication notes and all of the different medications he is currently on or have tried in the past.
Oh, boy.
So tons of information.
Yeah.
And as we've done before with like questions we've gotten on TikTok or messages or whatever it may be, I kind of like to show how I go through and dissect these things, because obviously I then sat down with a client via Zoom and we went through all of this stuff and talked about, first and foremost, what they've tried. I like to explain to people why a lot of the things that they've tried up until this point have not worked. That way it kind of helps them understand, like, I think a lot of people, it's like, they've tried so hard. And it's like, you know, when they go to another trainer, it's like, you know, they know in their mind it's not for a lack of trying. So they start thinking like, oh my God, like I've been trying. So it's like, it must just be a dog issue, right? Like he must not be able to get past these types of issues, right? When you explain to people why what they have tried so far does not work, why it has not worked for them, it helps them understand that it's a mix of obviously putting in the work, trying, but also doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Right? You could try to, say, lose weight all day long, but if the things you're doing do not actually apply to losing weight, so you're not going to lose any weight, right? You want to get better at something. You could try all you want to be better at playing chess, but if you never learn the rules of the game, you're just constantly guessing, right? And there's no direction. There's no path to success with those things. Right. So that's the first thing we need to isolate, is why the things don't work, so that they understand some of these concepts a little bit more, so that we could then build on them and make the adjustments we need to. So now what we're going to do, we're going to go back through this piece by piece, and we're going to talk about it a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's start from the beginning again. Stranger aggression. This is the main reason and concern. Feels to be addressed because it causes stress, safety risk. So inside of the home, they said he is out of control barking and jumping on the windows at deliveries, the pool cleaner, landscapers, or even just people walking past our house on the street. If he sees someone outside of our home, he begins barking, his hackles go up, and he will start jumping all over the windows and doors. If someone enters our home, we absolutely must muzzle him and or keep him on a leash or in a separate room to keep them safe. This is regardless of whether he's met them multiple times, and then they explain certain friends that come in and he's okay with, certain friends he's not come in with. So we started talking about this one a little bit over the phone, and the first question I like to ask everybody is, when people come over the house, what is your routine? We talk a lot before about consistent routine helps make things predictable for a dog, particularly dogs that are scared of stuff. Having predictability helps overcome a lot of fears, right? So up until this point, the problem is they were never given really good direction of how to keep things consistent. They've basically tried a lot of different things that all kind of conflict with each other, right? They've tried muzzling and keeping him on a leash in the house, right? So we know a muzzle, I comment this to people all the time because people always say, oh, maybe I'll get a muzzle for my dog. I say a muzzle is not a solution. It's a management technique, right? A leash is not a solution. It's a management technique. Or more specifically, a muzzle and a leash are not a solution. They are safety precautions. And they do absolutely nothing to stop the behavior. So a lot of people, these people in particular, they do this thing where there's a lot of individual concepts and they will try to implement one of those concepts. They will see that that concept by itself is limited, and then they will ditch that concept and then try a different one, right? And then they find that one's limited, and then they ditch that concept and they try something else. So in their case, they have historically tried muzzling him when people come over, but they're not doing anything else. They're basically like, well, if I put a muzzle on him, then he can't bite the person and he'll be able to get comfortable with them. But the problem they ran into is they put the muzzle on him, and though he was suppressed initially, they explained to me that they've run into situations recently where they had a guest come over the house, they put a muzzle on him, they just let him hang out, and Tank proceeded to basically jump on the person, like bear hug them and just intimidate them, right? Like, you know, he's like not killing them obviously, but a completely inappropriate behavior. And they didn't know what to do when he did that because the muzzle worked for what it was supposed to do, which was it kept the person still safe in that situation, but it did nothing to prevent the behavior from happening.
Exactly.
Right. They've tried just avoiding the situation, right? So keeping the shades down to minimize triggers, right? They said this works fairly well sometimes. Obviously, if he can't hear or see the trigger, he's not going to react at it. So this one really kills me because I hear force-free trainers talk about this all the time. They're like, oh yeah, buy window tint and put it on your windows. Fuck you. I ain't buying window tint and putting it on my windows.
Not living in a cave.
Yeah, right? But like, it's like... I understand force-free trainers recommend that in conjunction with the training plan, which is basically if you make it less of a trick, right? If you minimize the chances of it happening, and if the reaction is a little bit more subdued because they can't really see what's going on through it, maybe your probability of redirecting the dog then at that point or any of those things might be a little bit easier for them. But we know the flaws with that. We know that it's very limited as far as how far you're going to get going that route.
Yeah.
And for me, when I look at this, when we're going to take a balanced training approach, meaning we need to create some boundaries for this, we need to correct for this reactivity out the window, I always say, let's work on it where it needs to be worked on, right? I'm not interested in playing this like slow and steady game with something like barking out the window where like I have to make it easier for you to be successful. Like we need to just get past whatever the problem is. Right? And if that problem is when the blinds are open, you go bananas out the window at people walking by, we've got to address it there and then. Because like you said, this is like, sure, we could say like the human is not going to fucking die if they have to keep their shades closed. But like, come on, let's be real here. Like I shouldn't have to cater my entire life around my dog because he can't control himself barking out the window. I want to keep my shades open. So I'm going to keep my shades open, and the dog is going to learn not to react to things going on outside of it. Right? So... second thing, they've tried distracting him. They've historically done a lot of then, okay, we're not going to try to correct. We're not going to try to use the muzzle. We're not going to avoid, but we're just going to take that force-free approach of distracting him, right? We know that that is just straight up bribery then at that point, right? If you weren't throwing those treats, the dog would still be actively rehearsing the behavior, right? We want to hit a point where we don't need to be throwing treats. We don't need to be correcting because the dog just learns what not to do. And I shouldn't need to distract my dog from not working on, or from not doing these things. And even past that, they saw, even as they were doing that, he would eat a treat, then bark. Then he would eat another treat, then bark. Then he would eat another treat, then bark, right?
Doing nothing.
And then basically what they explained is the last thing that they moved into then at that point was simply crating him when people would come over. And not just crating him, right? Avoiding the situation while crating him. So they had him all the way in the bedroom on the other side of the house, all the lights off, close the door, crate completely covered, and noise machine on really loud while he was in there. Right? So basically he's isolated into the other room and he was calm when he was in there. They said, generally speaking, he didn't do anything when he was in there because he was away from all the triggers. Right? So I explained to them why all of those things independently are ineffective and how we need to make sure we check 3 boxes when we have people come over the house, right?
Okay.
We want to check the box of safety, right? So what are your techniques you could use for safety? We've got muzzles, we've got leashes, we have a crate. A crate can be a safety mechanism because obviously the dog can't get to the person while they're in the crate, right?
Yeah.
So we need to check the box of safety. We need to check the box of having a consistent routine for things. We need to check the box of making sure we have a way to hold the dog accountable for whatever thing it is that we ultimately want them to do. And then we want to make sure we have the ability to reinforce for proper behavior then at that point, right? So we started putting all these things together. All right, let's come up with a plan of a routine, right? Routine right now, and I do this a lot with my virtual clients, where I try to avoid using commands almost entirely because the skill it takes to teach something precise versus the skill it takes to stop something precise are two two total ends of the spectrum as far as difficulty is concerned, right? If I were to try to coach them through what I generally coach people through, which is getting their dog to hold a bed stay when people come over, stuff like that, that gets back into the realm of teaching obedience commands, which, first off, I don't need an obedience command in order to stop these types of things, right? 2, it's going to require a higher skill level for them, right?
Yeah.
So here's the compromise. Why do we do a bed stay when people come in the house initially? We do it to make sure we have a way to keep the dog out of the way when people are coming into the house. 2, we do it to make sure we have something we could hold the dog accountable for if there's any improper behavior.
Yeah.
And 3, we do it to have a central place that the dog can be in where people aren't going to mess with them when they're in that position. And 2, they have like a kind of a security net, if you will, of like a place they could retreat back to, right? So here's the thing. What else can serve that purpose? The crate can serve that purpose, right?
Yeah.
And though there's a little slightly bit less as far as the dog holding themselves into position because they're in the crate physically, we still have something we could hold the dog accountable for because they're still going to react when they're in the crate. A lot of dogs will see that door as a barrier they want to try to get past. They'll be pawing at the door or pushing at it or things like that. And you could achieve the same calm state of mind in the kennel as you could on a place board, right?
Okay.
So I told him, all right, let's get the crate. Let's not avoid the situation anymore. Let's put the crate somewhere where you guys would generally be hanging out, but just out of the way enough where it's not like right in the middle of everything.
Yeah.
I want him to be able to see what's going on, but not be in a position where people are going to be constantly messing with them and constantly 2 feet away from the crate and stuff like that, right? So I told him to do that. And we walked through a 3-step plan of how they're going to go ahead and start working through some of these problems. So before people come over, you're going to put him in the crate. You're going to have him just out of the way, but where he could see people coming in.
Okay.
And first and foremost, we're going to isolate a specific behavior that he might do when he's in the crate when people come in. So if people are ignoring him when he comes in, or when they come in, he, generally speaking, is going to start reacting in the crate and pawing at the crate. Those are 2 behaviors they've seen initially. So we teach them how to give a correction with the e-collar for that. We teach them how to interrupt that state of mind and get him to a place where he could start to then become chill in the crate and where he could start getting then acclimated to people walking around all over the place while he's in a contained and safe place.
Yeah.
Right? Step number 2 for that is similar to what we do with all of our clients when we do bed stays in these situations. Step number 2 is we have him in the crate. We do that for 20 to 30 minutes and let him acclimate himself to people being there. We correct for any nonsense. Then we put the muzzle on him. Then we let him out to be free. And same deal. Muzzle in conjunction with consequences for something very clear. So in this case, it would be jumping on people because that's historically what he's done in the past anytime he's tried to intimidate them. Is a twofold approach to things, right? So we could use those 2 things together to then get him used to being out and interacting with people. And then also I was instructing them through, once his behavior is good and he's no longer reacting, utilizing some rewards then for proper behavior. If they notice like he's ever in a position where it's a little tense and then he decides not to make the wrong decision, we could then mark and reward for that then at that point. Right? And then third would be once you've done all of that, you could move into interaction stages. But again, you got to build some success with each one before you get into it. Right? So I had them implement that. I described to them how that is going to be a consistent routine they could do every time and start building on some success. So let's say for the next 2 weeks, they only just have them in the crate still when people come over, which is kind of what I instructed them to do. you could start chipping away at addressing the reactivity, getting past that completely, making sure he's seeing and experiencing people moving around him without reacting. Everybody's safe. And then you have an opportunity then over the course of a couple of weeks to allow him to neutralize to it because he's not getting corrected for it anymore. And then start to build an even more neutral or positive association through the rewards that we'll be implementing then at that point. Right? And then the same deal would apply to, obviously, when people aren't there. He does the same thing when people are walking by the house.
Yeah.
Right. They mentioned in here many a times that he jumps on the windows. They said he'll jump on the curtains, all that kind of stuff, and start reacting. So same deal. We want to do a combination approach here, right? We want to do a combination approach of no commands. We're not trying to distract him away from doing this with commands. Let him do it. Correct for it. And then, obviously, once he's no longer reacting at that point, you could then reward for proper behavior then, right? So this is basically where I left them off with things to work on over the course of the first week. 2 days later, let me find this this text that I got from her.
Oh, for sure. So it sounds like they were doing things almost right. With the crate and... Yeah,
I mean, obviously, not really, right?
Yeah.
not really, because it's like they had all the individual skill, right? Like they had tried, they know that they need a safety protocol. They know they need to reward him for proper behavior, and they know they need to correct him for things.
Yeah.
And they know there's a degree of keep him successful by keeping him out of certain situations that's going to come into play with it.
Yeah.
But that's still a long ways from putting those things together in the proper way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. They were on to something, but it was
So okay, so I got this text yesterday from her. This was 2 days after our virtual call, right? So she said, "Good morning. We had our first real trial this morning with Tank when the cable guy came over. I put the crate in the living room. When the guy came to the door, there was the usual barking, which I immediately corrected. He came in and there was more barking, another correction, and that was it. He settled down. I would not say completely relaxed, but calm and observant. I was even in another room and the guy was standing less than 10 feet from the crate, no barking, growling, etc. At the risk of sounding dramatic, this felt like a miracle. We worked on the calmness yesterday as well when Marcelo came home. As we know, he's a very smart dog and definitely understood immediately what we expected and calmed down accordingly. That's something else we talked about is when Marcelo, the husband, came home, Marcelo had a bad habit of as soon as he walked in, getting the dog all jacked up.
Yep.
And the dog would uncontrollably jump all over him, go crazy. As soon as he heard the garage door open, Tank was jumping all over the window and everything because he was excited to see him. To which, we talked about this many times on the podcast as well, I explained to them, and Marcelo even himself said it, and he caught himself as soon as he said it. He's like, yeah, I feel bad about correcting him there because, he's not being aggressive. He's just uncontrollable. And I stopped and I was like, what word did you just say?
Uncontrollable.
Uncontrollable, right?
Yeah.
So don't look at good or bad, right?
Yeah.
Don't look at, oh, he's happy or, oh, he's scared or, oh, he really wants pets or he really wants to kill the person. Look at, is the dog controllable or not in the moment?
Yeah.
And all of this stuff, if you could address it in the states where it's safe, if you could address it in the places where he doesn't want to hurt the person, but he's uncontrollable, you're teaching the dog a very valuable skill. That skill is self-control.
Yeah.
And once a dog understands a concept of self-control bleeds into all other areas of life.
Yep.
There's something, I think I read this in a book or something, and I'm gonna butcher the fuck out of this, I'm sure. But I read this in a book somewhere. It was like a self-development book, self-improvement book. And they were talking about building discipline and building habits, right? And the idea was there were studies that when you look at people that are trying to change their life, when you look at people that are trying to revamp their life and improve on many areas, that a lot of people make the mistake if they try to independently focus on all of those things at once, they overwhelm themselves and then they fail ultimately. Where they say, those people, if they wind up going through a list of one thing at a time, and let's say you want to lose weight, you want to stop drinking, you want to stop smoking, you want to exercise more, you want to do this, you want to do that. If you just pick one of those things and you focus on building the self-discipline in order to do that thing, many of the other ones, when you go to work on them, are either almost gone then at that point. Like you never needed to consciously be like, oh, I'm going to do less of this or I'm going to do more of this. Or you've built the muscle of self-control, right? You've built the muscle of discipline so much so that working through that thing is almost effortless then at that point, right?
Yeah.
And I this very well may have been the habit book that I was just reading as well. There was a section in it where they talked about that. The same exact thing applies to, oh God, it's like all coming back to me. It was a section in that habit book. What were they talking about? I should at some point go back in and find. I think it was a section I was reading on the airplane ride home, the last place I was at, and I was like, damn, I need to like notate this and talk about it on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were talking about, I don't know. They were talking, it was something along those lines. Whatever.
Yeah.
So the same rings true for dogs, right? If you could get the dog to practice self-control in one area, I truly, genuinely believe that will impact all the other areas where they lack self-control as well. And it's not going to just fix them, right? Like there are still other things that need to be worked on, but you could get yourself, trainers talk so much about gaining leverage, right? That's something I'm sure you've heard me talk about and other trainers talk about. What we mean when we say that is by working on one thing, we establish so many more things than just stopping the dog from getting in the trash can.
Yeah.
We establish more focus in general. We establish more respect in general. We establish the dog learning to use their brain a little bit more and start thinking before they just act on things. And once a dog is used to doing those things, all of those skills apply to this. So then we just build on it in those areas.
Yeah.
Right? So anyways, so that's why we talked about in those situations, like them coming home, Marcelo coming home from work, which has historically been a big problem. You have to work on it there as well. So anyway, she said he definitely understood immediately what we expected and calmed down accordingly, meaning obviously it wasn't as much of a problem, right?
Love that.
She's now convinced Marcelo needs more training than Tank. We commonly hear that as well.
Yes, we do.
Earlier in the day, I corrected once when he barked at someone across the street, and it worked immediately, even when Lucy kept barking at them. That's their other dog. And that's another common question we get all the time is people with multi-dog households. If I train one of my dogs, but my other dog still does some of these things I don't want, will that matter? To which I always answer it, yes and no.
Yeah.
Yes and no, right? No from the standpoint of whatever another dog is doing should not be an excuse for your dog to rehearse certain things, right?
True.
Yes, because addressing it with both dogs definitely makes it easier for the other a little bit because dogs feed off each other.
Yeah.
Right? So whatever. So she basically asked me that, and things were great. So that was positive, obviously. 2 days after, they're already seeing some headway with this, and it's because we simplified stuff. We came up with good routines for things. And I'll tell you, creating boundaries for things, once you learn how to tell your dog no in a way that they truly understand, being able to apply this to any situation and be able to get a dog to understand, oh, I do this thing, and it's not fun to do. I should just stop doing that thing. It is such a goddamn simple concept for them to understand.
Yeah.
It really is. Take a sip of this.
I didn't even know they had another dog until that message right there.
Yeah, the other dog is not much of a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's how we addressed a lot of this stuff inside. Obviously, like I said, they've got also an issue with walks, right?
Yeah.
She then further asked me some questions about... She asked me some further questions about how to handle some other things. She said, actually, here, we'll kind of keep going here. So after that text, she asked me, she said she wanted to check in because they've made plans with their friend to come over for dinner, and they wanted to work on the training, obviously. They said this is a person that Tank historically has not liked in the past. So and it's one of the people that Tank has tried to bite before in the house too. Oh. So they asked, like, can you confirm our approach? The approach was Tank in the crate in the living room when he first arrives, correct as today when the barking starts or pawing at the crate. After a while, to let Tank out of the crate with the muzzle on and correct any aggressive behaviors towards Amit. And they asked, how long do we wait? Or is it something that we do next time we have someone come over? They said they're just very eager to continue making progress.
Sure.
this is where a lot of clients will also kind of start to make mistakes, is they push it too fast. So anytime we're using corrections, anytime we're using like a high level of punishment in order to stop certain things, it's not just about stopping something in the moment, but it's then allowing the dog to become confident in avoiding the correction. This is another mistake a lot of trainers make, and a lot of owners will make, where they start trying to run right away with what they're working on because they've seen some progress.
Yeah.
Right? So Tank had now we'll say a couple big tests over the course of a day where they've been able to effectively stop him and get him calm when somebody's over the house while he's in the crate.
Yep.
They've been able to stop him and get him calm when people are walking by the front window very effortlessly, which has been a big problem in the past. And they've been able to keep him calm when Marcelo is coming home, right? So, but it's only been one time, right? It's only been one day.
One day.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that they were able to stop that in that moment. But now what we need to do is we need to build on some success, right? So next time somebody comes over, he's probably still going to bark once or twice, but they'll be able to correct him and get him calmer faster. The next time somebody walks by the house, they'll probably still need to correct him, but he'll calm down faster. The next time Marcelo comes home, maybe he won't even try to jump at all when he comes over, right? Then the next time it happens, maybe you don't need to correct for any of it, and he just does the right thing, no corrections needed, but is like a little bit like, I want to make sure I don't get corrected still. Then the next time it happens, no corrections needed, and he's a little bit calmer. And then the next time a little bit calmer, right? So you need to go through the sequence then of he learned to avoid the correction. Then he's still a little bit apprehensive of, I want to make sure I don't get corrected. Then he's confident in, as long as I don't do this thing, I don't get corrected, right? And those are the parts that take slightly more time as you're working through these things.
Yeah.
And you need to let the dog work through that stage with things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Allow the behavior to become totally extinguished and allow the dog to become confident in then what you're doing. And this is where, again, I don't talk about them that much because the corrections are the more important part, but this is where the rewards can come into play, right? You've stopped the behavior. So now let's get him like thrilled with what it is that we're working on, especially since he's a very food motivated dog, as they described to me. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like you kind of get people to just pump the brakes just a little bit, right? Because if the next time it happens, the routine is effectively changed again, right? So now it's like, oh my God, the crate was working, but now I'm out of the crate. Like, what the, you know what I mean? Like, you've got to ease into some of that stuff a little bit. So usually I give people, depending on how frequently they have people come over the house, timelines with this stuff. Like that crate thing that I told them to do that they did and worked very well when the cable guy came over, do that for the next 6 times people come over the house.
Yeah.
Right? And don't change it.
Yeah.
And you will find each time you do it, your dog will noticeably be calmer and calmer and calmer and calmer, more confident, more confident, more confident. And then once you see it's like, it ain't nothing for him to do that, then we move on to the next stage.
Yeah.
Right. Then we push it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Right. And then same deal. Once that's good, then we move on to the next stage with things.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't want to end up how it was before where they tried something, you stop.
Yeah. I mean, it's even though it's a progression of what they were doing, it's still changing things up in the dog's mind.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You need to build the confidence with it. And then they proceeded to further ask, they were like, oh, since we talked last, there are some other things we'd like to work on as well. Like, when can we start doing that? And same deal. I was like, hey, just focus on this initially. Just one thing at a time. Because here's the thing, right? If they can get to a place where he doesn't bark out the window at things that are walking by, and when people come over, they have a surefire way they can keep him calm and confident.
Yeah.
Even if he's not out, that is so much further along than they were at before.
Yeah.
And it's literally, they adjusted 2 things.
Yep.
They literally adjusted 2 fucking things. They moved the crate somewhere else. They started correcting him more consistently for something. And then they created a good routine for when one of them comes home or when a new person comes over the house.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's why I say these virtual classes can be so effective, and why my biggest job is to kind of slow people down and simplify the things that they're already trying, because 3 adjustments that take almost 0 work to do can make your life 50% better than what it was before with your dog.
Yeah.
50% better. We didn't even talk about, they mentioned the walk on this.
Yeah.
We briefly talked about some things that we're going to work on, because we're going to do another virtual call next week. Some things that we're going to kind of adjust as far as, how they're currently handling things. But I'm not even worried about that right now.
Yeah.
I'm not even worried about that right now.
No. Let's get one success in,
Yes.
Yeah. And it's like, we appreciate the eagerness, of course.
Love it. Love it.
But, just let's take some baby steps.
Baby steps. Okay, so let me pull up my other one here then. What I've got. So I'll keep everybody posted on that. But again, I thought that was a cool one to kind of talk about a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's funny, both of them were so similar that I did.
How big's Tank anyway?
Probably like 50 pounds or so.
Oh, okay. So he's not gigantic.
Okay. All right. So we're going to read this next one. This client is in the Virginia area.
Okay.
All right. So they said, "Hello, David. This email is to send you over the goals and details of my 7.5-month-old black lab pup, Yingling. Goals. 1, to address reactivity to dogs, people, and animals outside the glass door window in my basement where we both live." Sounds a little bit similar.
Yeah, very much so.
Incidents: barking, growling, and pawing at the door. Triggered by, first by neighbor's dog in the backyard, off leash, then by just the neighbor or dog, or both, in their own backyard, 100 feet away. And also a fox right outside the door has triggered it. What she's tried: blocking the view with a room divider and curtains. Guys, this is like, sometimes I think when I speak with people over the phone, people really want to like, oh, you got to come to my house. You got to see this, right? You've not, you know what I mean? I think a lot of people get it in their head because their life is so miserable with their dog that their situation is so much worse than everybody else's. I promise, guys, you're not alone.
Yeah.
So many people are in the exact same boat that you're in. The exact same one, which is why I could, like, as I'm talking to people, I could almost like echo back to them what they're about to say.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, these two, like you just said, so similar.
So they've tried blocking the view with a room divider and curtains. And then they've been inconsistent. First, I'd try redirecting her with quiet and place commands. When I said quiet, she didn't listen. I stepped between her and the door. She started whining and pacing back and forth, then complied with the place command. She sent some videos. We won't talk about that. There's a lot of notes on the videos, obviously. And then her second goal is enhance obedience in high distraction environments using the e-collar, walks and healing, guests entering, and public sits and down stays. So we'll just kind of quickly talk about this here. So the big goal for her was getting her dog to stop reacting out the window.
Yeah.
And I wanted to explain to her again why what she was doing wasn't working. Now, hers is a little bit different because she tried a little bit of a hybrid approach, right? Oh, actually, you know what? I do want to talk about the video because the video explains what she was doing wrong. So videos, I don't have the big reactions on video, but I was able to set something up by putting a stuffed animal outside. See video 1. The video cut out because someone called her, but she said no and tried a correction at a level 10 on an e-collar. This is the level that completely stopped her from jumping and stopping her dead in her tracks from chasing squirrels and deer. It did nothing here, so I went to a level 30. She winced and kept barking. I didn't want to try anything else before talking to you, although I know the way that I handled this was very poor with the timing and correcting at levels that didn't work. If this is a level 4 reaction in the video, I'd call the others I described about a level 7. And then she said also video number 2, this is a very minor reaction, but this was with the windows blocked, thinking she heard something outside. So, okay. First, let's talk about a couple things, right? This is something I talked about with this client as well that we haven't discussed yet. Finding the right level on the e-collar. So this client mentioned, obviously, she said no and tried a correction at a level 10. This is the level that completely stopped her from jumping and stopping her dead in her tracks from chasing squirrels and deer. So sometimes we run into a situation like that where we've used the e-collar for something. You know, obviously she had just started the e-collar training not very long ago, right? And she used a 10 for something, and it's like stop the dog completely, right? We can very quickly get it in our head. That's it.
That's it, yeah.
10 is fucking it, man, right? 10 is it. Now, she's using an e-collar technologies collar, right? And actually, no, I believe she was using a Dogtra collar, if I'm not mistaken, which has 127 levels. Now, a 10 on a mini educator, which goes up to 100, is nothing.
Can't even feel it, really.
You literally cannot even feel it, right? So depending on where you put it, you might feel a little bit, but 10 is so low. I can't even describe how low it is. Why did it work? Why did it stop her dog dead in his tracks if it's so low? When you first start e-collar training with your dog, you go through a couple of phases with things. Phase number 1 is this is a really novel sensation, and I have no idea what the hell it is. Now, when you're in phase number 1, when you first start e-collar training with your dog, you may find your dog is so hypersensitive to the collar. You could put it at a 3, and they're like, maybe shying away from it a little bit, or letting out a little yip, or stopping them dead in their tracks at something, or whatever it may be. But I tell everybody, that has absolutely nothing to do with your dog being so physically sensitive that they need lower levels. Objectively, that level is so low, we know there's nothing painful about it. Just plain and simple. Yep. Absolutely. But because it's so novel, and because a lot of these dogs, though they may not be very physically sensitive to things, a lot of these dogs are very emotionally sensitive to things. Right? Mentally sensitive to things. And when you have dogs that are very mentally sensitive to things, they get wigged out by new stuff.
Yeah.
It could be an e-collar. It could be you put a different type of collar on their neck that's not even an aversive collar.
Yeah.
You put a harness on them. How many times have you ever seen a dog I'll give you 2 examples. You put either a new coat or sweater on them, or when you put the shoes on them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And they're just like,
yep.
What the fuck? Like, they're genuinely, like, we look
Just
at it
shut
and
down.
we think it's like cute
Yeah.
and funny sometimes when we see stuff like
Yeah.
that, right? Which I get it. I understand, obviously,
Yeah.
right? But if we call a spade, that dog is shut down because they're nervous of what that new thing is.
Yeah.
It's scaring them. They're freaked out.
Yep.
Because they're not mentally strong, right? They are mentally sensitive. So dogs, when you first start e-collar training, that's what winds up being.
Yeah.
And that, unfortunately, or fortunately, we could say, fades away so fast as they start realizing that, it's not really anything that scary, right?
Yeah.
So you shift from the e-collar working because it's novel and a little startling to the dog, to the e-collar working the way it's intended to work, which is off of pain and discomfort, right? Obviously, that is why an e-collar works. It's uncomfortable on the dog. The dog wants to escape or avoid the sensation, right? So because of that, if owners aren't aware of that, they get very startled when they see that 10 does absolutely nothing at all later on. And then furthermore, they start increasing the level. And then they might get a little vocalization, which same deal, isn't pain or discomfort, but a lot of times it's just the arousal. They're so aroused, and it's like poking them, like and they don't know what to make of it. Right. So first we have to reassure the client why that is happening, which is exactly what I just described. Yeah. Once they understand why that's happening, then we could work to go off of not what the dog does from that standpoint, as far as, when they feel the sensation, like what do they do? But what do they really do? Like when they feel that correction, do they just take it and continue doing what it is that they're doing?
Right.
Or do they get the correction, take it, and then go, wait a minute. Well, I need to change what I'm doing in order to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
And that comes from playing around with the level a little bit. And that comes from, like what we talked about with this client, simplifying your expectations as much as you can.
Yeah.
Many, many people... one of the things they said in this under the walk section, because this is something we talked about. They said, we worked on this extensively with the e-collar. As she mentioned, the issue we ran into was that the correction started to not work. And as we increased the strength of the correction, he would yelp and shriek, but still not stop the behavior. It became really painful, and he would get bad irritation around his neck. And frankly, we felt really bad about doing it and hearing him suffer, right? The walk is one of the last, like when we deal with dogs like this, I will always pick the stuff inside of the house to work on versus outside of the house to work on.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, a lot of owners will habituate your dog to e-collar corrections by slowly increasing the level, which is what they did. The issue they ran into with the correction started to not work, and as they increased the strength of the correction, he would yelp and shriek, but still not stop the behavior. So that tells me that you're going up way too slow, and obviously, once you hit a point where it is motivating, he doesn't know how to avoid that sensation, because with the walk, we're not just stopping an unwanted behavior, right? It's very clear, or it's very unclear, I should say, when a dog is reacting on a leash to isolate the specific thing we want the dog not to do, where in the case of a dog in a crate, we could isolate pawing at the crate. They could consciously be like, every time I paw at this crate, a correction happens. Every time I paw at this crate, a correction happens. If they're deliberately barking, They could consciously say, every time I bark, this correction happens. Every time I bark, this correction happens. That's why bark collars work, guys, right? On the walk, a lot of times we're kind of trying to correct for a heel. We're kind of correcting for pulling on the leash. We're kind of correcting for barking. We're kind of correcting for like the screeching that they're doing. We're kind of correcting for looking at other, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like people muddy it so fast. And this is why one of the most common places we see owners make big mistakes with the e-collar is on the walk, when it's like dog's reacting, we're just correct, but they're not really conscious of what exactly does the dog need to do in order to avoid this correction. It becomes so much more complex for them in that moment, as opposed to in the case of the in-the-house stuff like we described. We could isolate a thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's one reason why the e-collar will seemingly not work, even as you increase it to a point where the dog is obviously motivated by the sensation. They learn to just fight through it. I don't know how to avoid this, so I might as well just keep freaking out. I don't like it, right? That is where you get into like trigger words like learned helplessness. We could call that a state of learned helplessness, right? Which is the dog cannot escape the pressure. So they just keep freaking out. It's just it's a mess, right?
Yeah.
The other thing they mentioned, he would get bad irritation around his neck because when I spoke with them on the Zoom call, they were under the impression that this is from using higher levels on the e-collar. Man, is that one that I hate when people think it, because I know a fucking vet told them that at some point.
Yeah.
I know some fucking person on the internet told them that at some point. Oh, the e-collar is burning the dog. Guys, the technology used in e-collars, literally, it is impossible for it to create any heat where it will burn the skin and cause irritation. If your dog is getting irritation on the neck, it is only because that thing is sitting in one spot for too long, because it's snug and because it's metal. That causes a lot of irritation. So you got to rotate it around the neck. And some dogs are hypersensitive to that metal. Then you've got to get comfort pad contact points that are less irritable on the skin. But that has nothing to do with the use of the e-collar.
Nope.
And then, the last part about it, we talked about how they mentioned they felt really bad about doing it and hearing him suffer. Your dog is, I like to explain to people, your dog is suffering one way or another, right? Your e-collar use is not causing the dog to suffer. The dog was in a state of mental anguish prior to you even using the e-collar at that point. And though you might be adding a little bit more fuel to the fire by being confusing with the e-collar, the best thing we could do is get the dog out of the state of mind of reacting in the first place, not need to use the correction anymore, and cause the dog to become less mentally stressed as a baseline altogether. Right?
Yep.
So I explained the same thing with this client on how to gauge the right level, how to implement it to start, getting their dog to stop freaking out the window.
Yeah.
And because she wasn't having major issues outside of this, I then walked her through starting to utilize the e-collar properly with recall as well, which I just sent her one of the videos that actually you and I filmed fucking forever ago with Archie the Vizsla.
Oh,
remember
Vizsla.
Archie?
Yeah, I remember Archie.
There's a video on our YouTube channel called teaching your dog to come when called with an e-collar. And I think it's one of the best videos we've ever done on teaching recall with an e-collar with Archie. Yo, they have sent now 3 dogs to us. So they sent Archie the Vizsla to us.
Yeah.
Archie recently passed away. He got a really nasty cancer or something.
Oh, R.I.P.
Then they got Woody the Vizsla.
Yeah.
Little fucking Woody. He's a peanut Vizsla, man. This dude's so tiny.
Really?
And then they recently got Jimmy Dean the Vizsla.
Jimmy Dean.
Jimmy Dean. Every time I say his name, I always think Johnny Cash, because we had a GSP that we trained a couple years back named Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
And we don't get very many names that are a full ass name
full
like
name.
that, particularly one that starts with a J.
Yeah.
JC or JD. They're so similar. I don't know why. I just want to say Johnny Cash every time I hear his name.
Jimmy Dean.
But it's Jimmy Dean.
Dang.
The boy of breakfast.
The boy of breakfast.
So I basically walked you guys through the consult that I did with both of these clients. I mean, there's not much more to it than that, right?
Yeah.
I simplify, figure out what's going wrong, get as much information as you can from them prior to going into the call, and give them the most stupidly simple thing that they could do over the course of a week that will heed them the most results.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whether that's managing the situation better. Usually I like to have a combination of managing the situations we're not in a position to address, right? And then in addition to that, coming up with just a black and white solution for whatever the biggest problem is that we could stop now.
Yeah. I think you started like implementing these pretty much mostly last year, right?
Yeah.
And it's just been nothing but great.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, we don't do a ridiculous amount of them. I would say I do 1 or 2 every couple weeks.
That's still
But
great.
it's good.
Yeah.
You know, I get to talk to a lot of cool people with it.
Yeah. And you can still
like
change people's lives with it, you know?
Yeah, and it's such a low, because it's new for me, I don't have a ridiculous demand for them or anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a low cost of entry for people. You know what I mean? Like, it's $150, guys. You want to do a virtual call with me, $150 for the hour. That's like that's literally $100 less than what I would charge for in-person hour.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And it's just because I like doing it. It's easy. I can do it from my house. I come up here, hop on a Zoom call, talk to people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's fun. It's a low cost of entry. And many people, I made a post about this on Instagram the other day. Like, many people can do 2 of these with me, and things aren't perfect, right?
Yeah.
But they can make things so much better for themselves. Like, I've had a couple clients that have left reviews now at this point that were virtual clients that I've done 2 or 3 of these with. And it's like the amount of progress that I've been able to make with just a little bit of coaching, a little bit of tweaks, you know? And that's the other thing too. Like, I'm selling these to people who have generally done training already. They've done some sort of program with their dog.
Yeah.
And because they've done some sort of program with their dog, they're not starting green. They kind of know how to use an e-collar. Or at least the basic things that take me a lot of time to do. Like, I don't have to walk through with either of these clients because they've both done e-collar training. I don't have to walk through with these clients how to turn the e-collar on, what the buttons, you know what I mean? Like, all that stuff that's time consuming, we could just get right into, okay, you're using it this way, use it this way instead.
Yeah. Yep. Get into the meat and potatoes. You don't have to worry about the fluff.
Yeah. So those are 2 of them I did. Excited to see how they progress. Like I said, I've got follow-ups with both of them next week. So I'll kind of keep everybody posted how they go. And we'll kind of go from there.
Sounds great.
So that's all I got for you guys today.
I think that was wonderful.
Hope you enjoyed it.
I know I did.
Okay. Catch you on the next one.
All right. See you guys.